was full, casting a silver sheen over the dense forest. The night air was cold, but invigorating, pulling me deeper into the dream. I'd been here before, or at least it felt that way, yet everything seemed so vivid this time. The trees whispered secrets in a language I couldn't understand, and the path beneath my feet glowed faintly. As I walked, I began to notice strange shapes moving in the shadows, but their presence didn't frighten me. Instead, it felt as though they were guiding me, ensuring I stayed on the path toward the lake. When the forest opened up, I saw it, the lake shimmering with an unearthly glow. Its surface reflected the stars, but not the ones I knew. The water reflected stars that never existed in the sky. I murmured to myself, the words spilling out as if they belonged to someone else. A sense of awe rooted me to the spot, but a whispering breeze urged me closer. My hand twitched with a desire to touch the water, to feel the cool, mysterious liquid that held answers I hadn't yet dared to seek. The village had warned against this place, their voices dripping with caution and superstition. They spoke of those who'd vanished or returned changed. Yet here I was, drawn by the dream's magnetic pull. Standing at the edge of the lake, I noticed faint figures on the opposite shore. They looked familiar, yet unplaceable. Were they from my past or glimpses of who I could become? The distinction blurred as I stared. My pulse quickened. I could hear my heartbeat echoing in the stillness, each thump seeming louder than the last. From behind me, a voice spoke, low and steady. "You shouldn't be here." I turned sharply to find a man standing there, cloaked in shadows. His features were hard to discern, but his eyes glowed faintly like embers. "You're trespassing on the edge of two worlds," he added. Something about his tone made me hesitate, but my curiosity outweighed my fear. "Who are you?" I asked. He didn't respond directly, instead pointing to the water. "If you touch it, you'll see. But beware, the lake doesn't lie." His warning unsettled me, yet my resolve didn't falter. I kneeled by the edge of the lake, the grass damp against my knees. The surface seemed to ripple in anticipation, as if it knew I was there. My fingers hovered inches above the water, trembling slightly. A reflection that wasn't mine stared back at me. It was older, wearier, but unmistakably me. "What is this?" I whispered, half to myself and half to the man. He didn't answer, but stepped closer, his presence heavy. "The lake shows you futures," he finally said, "but it's up to you to interpret them." I dipped my fingers into the water, and the world shifted. Colors swirled around me, pulling me into a kaleidoscope of scenes. Each one felt real, like I was living them. I saw myself standing at a crossroads, surrounded by faceless figures. Some extended their hands to me, while others turned away. My chest tightened as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Voices filled the air, overlapping and incomprehensible. They sounded urgent, pleading even, but I couldn't distinguish any words. The man's voice cut through the chaos. "Focus," he commanded. "Choose wisely." Suddenly, I was back by the lake, gasping for air. The water's surface was calm, betraying no sign of what I'd just experienced. The man stood over me, his expression unreadable. "What did you see?" he asked. My voice faltered as I tried to explain. "Choices. Faces I didn't know. Paths I couldn't." He nodded knowingly, as if he'd heard it all before. "The lake doesn't offer clarity, only possibility. You must find your own meaning." His words weighed on me, and for the first time, I felt the gravity of what I'd done. I noticed movement in the water again. This time, it showed a woman. Her face was serene, but her eyes were filled with sadness. She stood in a place I didn't recognize, surrounded by ruins. I felt an overwhelming sense of loss, though I didn't know why. "Who is she?" I asked the man. He didn't answer, only watching the scene with a somber expression. The image faded as quickly as it appeared, leaving the water clear once more. My mind raced with questions, but I knew better than to demand answers. Another figure appeared, a boy this time. He was smiling, holding a flower I couldn't name. The scene was bright and warm, a stark contrast to the woman's. "Is this another future?" I asked. The man's silence was maddening, but his eyes told me everything. Each vision was a thread, woven into a tapestry I couldn't yet comprehend. The boy's laughter echoed faintly, lingering even after his image disappeared. My heart ached, though I couldn't explain why. The lake's mysteries were intoxicating, pulling me deeper into their grasp. A chill ran down my spine as the air around me grew colder. The man stepped back, his gaze shifting to the horizon. "Time is running out," he said cryptically. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing unusual. The lake's glow seemed to dim slightly, its once vivid colors fading into muted tones. Panic set in as I realized I wasn't ready to leave. There was so much more to understand, so many questions left unanswered. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man's expression hardened. "That's up to you." As the lake darkened, the figures on the opposite shore began to fade. Their forms dissolved like mist, leaving only faint outlines. I felt a pang of regret, wondering if I'd missed my chance to understand them. The man's presence grew heavier, as if he were absorbing the lake's energy. "This place exists only in moments," he said. "You've seen enough for now." His words felt final, a decree I couldn't contest. The forest around us seemed to close in, the trees leaning closer as if to shield the lake from view. My feet felt rooted to the ground, but the man's hand on my shoulder broke the spell. "You'll return when it's time," he said, his voice softer now. "For now, you need to leave." The urgency in his tone left no room for argument. I turned reluctantly, casting one last glance at the lake. Its surface was now dark and still, holding no trace of the visions it had shown me. The stars above seemed brighter, more real, but the memory of the lake's impossible reflections lingered in my mind. The path back through the forest was different, unfamiliar. The trees seemed taller, their branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. Each step felt heavier, as if the dream was trying to hold me back. I stumbled, catching myself on a rough trunk. The bark felt cold and alive, pulsing faintly under my hand. A sense of foreboding settled over me, but I pressed on. The man's voice echoed in my mind, urging me forward. "You've seen enough for now," the words repeated like a mantra, guiding me through the darkness. When I finally emerged from the forest, the village was nowhere in sight. Instead, I found myself in an open field, bathed in silvery light. The grass swayed gently, as if moved by an unseen force. My chest tightened as I realized I was alone. The dream's clarity was fading, the edges of my surroundings growing softer. I called out, hoping for a response, but the only sound was the whisper of the wind. The lake's visions replayed in my mind, each one more vivid than the last. I dropped to my knees in the field, overwhelmed by the weight of what I'd experienced. The stars above seemed to mock me with their brilliance, a reminder of the lake's impossible reflections. The water reflected stars that never existed in the sky, I repeated, the words grounding me in the fading dream. My hand brushed against the grass, its texture rough and real. Tears welled in my eyes as I grappled with the dream's meaning. Was it a warning, a promise, or something else entirely? The answer eluded me, leaving only questions in its wake. The field began to dissolve, the silvery light giving way to darkness. My body felt weightless, as if I were being pulled upward. A sense of peace washed over me, though it was tinged with sorrow. The lake, the visions, the man, they all felt distant now, like fragments of a fading memory. My final thought before waking was a promise. I would return. Whatever the lake held, I wasn't done searching for it. The dream ended with a flash of light, leaving me gasping for air in my own bed, the echoes of the lake still haunting my mind. The days after the dream felt unreal, as though the world had shifted beneath my feet. The sunlight seemed harsher, the air heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that the lake had marked me somehow. The visions replayed in my mind on a loop, each detail more vivid than the last. Who was the woman in the ruins? Why did the boy's laughter linger in my chest like an unspoken truth? And most of all, who was the man with ember eyes? His warning echoed in every quiet moment. The lake doesn't lie. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into routine tasks, but the village seemed different now. People's faces held a familiarity I hadn't noticed before, as though I'd seen their shadows in the lake's reflections. The elders, in particular, avoided my gaze, their whispers growing quieter whenever I entered a room. It was as if they knew. One night, I confronted them during a gathering. "What is the lake?" I demanded. The room fell silent, their eyes heavy with something I couldn't name, fear, perhaps, or regret. "The lake chooses," one of the elders finally said, her voice trembling. "It reveals truths we're not always ready to see. Some call it a blessing, others a curse." She looked at me with a mixture of pity and reverence. "You went there, didn't you?" I nodded, my chest tightening. The room erupted into murmurs, the villagers exchanging worried glances. Another elder spoke up, his tone more stern. "If the lake called to you, then your path is no longer your own. Be careful, child. Its gifts come with a price." That night, I couldn't sleep. The elder's words haunted me, but so did the silence of the lake. Why had it shown me those visions? What price would I have to pay? As I stared at the ceiling, I felt an inexplicable pull, a tug deep in my chest. It wasn't the lake this time, but something else, something closer. I rose from bed and stepped outside. The air was cool, the village quiet. In the distance, I saw a faint glow, a flicker of light near the forest's edge. Without thinking, I followed it. The glow led me to a clearing I didn't recognize, though it felt oddly familiar. In the center stood a stone altar, its surface covered in intricate carvings. The light seemed to emanate from the altar itself, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. My fingers traced the carvings, their patterns evoking a strange sense of déjà vu. Symbols I couldn't read danced beneath my touch, and I felt a hum of energy course through me. "What is this place?" I whispered, though I didn't expect an answer. A voice broke the silence, low and resonant. The lake's influence extends far beyond its shores. I spun around to find the man with emerald eyes standing there, his presence as commanding as ever. "You're connected to it now, whether you like it or not," he said, stepping closer. His gaze fell to the altar, and his expression softened. "This is a waypoint, a tether between worlds. It's why the lake called you." I opened my mouth to ask 1,000 questions, but he raised a hand to stop me. "Not yet. You're not ready." Frustration bubbled inside me, but his words carried a weight I couldn't ignore. "Then what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. He didn't seem offended, only contemplative. "Listen," he said simply. "The lake has already shown you the pieces. Now you must find how they fit together." He gestured to the altar. "This is the first step. The answers you seek are not in the lake, but in the echoes it left behind." Before I could respond, the glow of the altar intensified. blinding me for a moment. When I blinked, the clearing was empty. The man, the altar, the light all gone. I was alone again, standing in the middle of an unfamiliar forest. Panic set in as I realized I didn't know the way back. The trees loomed taller than before, their shadows stretching endlessly. My breath quickened, but then I heard it. A faint melody, distant yet soothing. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, guiding me like the whispers in the dream. I followed the melody, my steps hesitant but purposeful. The forest seemed to shift around me, the path changing with every turn. Time felt meaningless as I walked, the song growing louder with each step. Finally, I emerged into another clearing, this one bathed in moonlight. At its center stood a woman, her back to me. Her figure was familiar, her presence heavy with the same sadness I'd felt in the lake's vision. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. She turned slowly, her face serene but haunting. "I've been waiting for you," she said. The woman's words felt both reassuring and overwhelming. "But how?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She studied me for a moment, her gaze piercing yet tender. "The lake reveals, but it does not decide," she said. "Its visions are fragments, possibilities. To shape them, you must understand them." She gestured toward the moonlit clearing, and for the first time, I noticed a small pool of water shimmering nearby. "Look," she urged, "and listen." Reluctantly, I stepped toward the water, my reflection rippling with every step. The surface stilled, and then the images began. This time, the vision was not fragmented, but continuous, as if I were watching a story unfold. The ruins appeared again, but they were no longer abandoned. People moved within them, rebuilding walls, planting gardens, and lighting fires. Among them was the boy from my dream, older now, his laughter replaced by determination. Beside him stood the woman, guiding him as he worked. Then I saw myself, standing at the edge of the ruins, watching as the village thrived. The vision shifted, showing moments of struggle and triumph, of choices made and paths altered. When it ended, I was left staring at my own reflection once more. "What does it mean?" I asked, turning back to the woman. She was closer now, her expression unreadable. "It means you have a role to play," she said. "The ruins can become a sanctuary, a place where the broken are made whole again. But only if you take the first step." Her words were heavy with significance, and I felt the weight of them settle in my chest. "What if I fail?" I asked, the fear I'd been holding back finally spilling out. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch warm and grounding. "Failure is part of the journey," she said. "What matters is that you try." Her reassurance gave me strength, but questions still swirled in my mind. What happened to this place? Why did the lake show me these visions? The woman's gaze grew distant, as if recalling a memory too painful to hold. "This land was once whole, its people united," she said. "But greed and fear tore it apart. The lake remembers what was lost and seeks to restore it. That is why it called you. You carry the strength to mend what was broken." Her words resonated deeply, filling me with both purpose and dread. Before I could ask more, the woman began to fade, her form dissolving into the moonlight. "Wait," I called out, panic rising in my voice. "I still don't understand." She smiled softly, her features shimmering like water. "You will," she said. "Trust yourself and trust the echoes. They will guide you." And then she was gone, leaving only the melody of the forest and the soft glow of the pool behind. I stood there for what felt like hours, the weight of her words anchoring me to the spot. Eventually, I turned back toward the forest, my path illuminated by the moon. The journey home was less disorienting this time, the trees parting as if guiding me back to the village. When I arrived, dawn was breaking, casting a golden light over the familiar rooftops. I knew my life had changed irrevocably, that the visions and the woman's words would follow me forever. But for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope and ember waiting to ignite. Whatever the lake's purpose, I was determined to see it through. The echoes had spoken, and I was ready to listen. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope between two worlds, the familiar life of the village and the uncharted path the lake had laid before me. The elders avoided me, their gazes heavy with silent warnings. Even my closest friends seemed distant, their laughter faltering whenever I joined them. It was as though the village sensed the change in me before I fully understood it myself. Yet, amidst the unease, I noticed subtle shifts, whispers carried on the wind, fleeting shadows at the forest's edge, and the lingering hum of the melody I had followed that night. Determined to uncover the truth, I found myself drawn back to the ruins from my visions. The journey was arduous, the forest resisting me at every turn. Branches snagged my clothes, and roots seemed to shift beneath my feet. Yet, despite these obstacles, a strange familiarity guided me. The path felt etched into my memory, as though I'd walked it 1,000 times before. When I finally emerged into the clearing, the ruins loomed before me, more imposing than I had imagined. Their walls, overtaken by moss and vines, pulsed with an energy that made the air feel alive. Signs of life littered the ruins, ashes from a fire pit, a forgotten cloak draped over a stone, and fresh carvings etched into the ancient walls. The symbols mirrored those I'd seen on the altar, their patterns tugging at the edges of my mind. As I traced them with my fingers, a faint voice filled the air, a whisper, distant yet insistent. Though I couldn't understand the words, the urgency in its tone was unmistakable. I followed the sound deeper into the ruins, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The voice led me to a hidden chamber beneath the rubble. The air here was dense, charged with the same energy I had felt at the altar. In the center stood a pool, its surface unnaturally still. Surrounding it were more carvings, forming a circle that seemed to hum with life. As I stepped closer, the voice faded, replaced by a vision rippling across the water. The man with ember eyes appeared, his expression grim. "You're not alone in this," he said, his voice echoing within the chamber. "Others are searching for the lake's power, but not all for noble reasons. Be wary. The lake's truths can be twisted into weapons." His warning sent a chill through me, but I couldn't look away. The vision shifted, revealing cloaked figures moving through the forest. Their faces were obscured, but their intentions were clear. They sought the lake's secrets, just as I did. The vision faded, leaving the stillness of the pool and the weight of the man's words. The lake wasn't just a force of revelation, it was a battlefield, and I was now caught in the middle. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but a deeper resolve took hold. If others were seeking the lake's power, I needed to understand it first. The ruins weren't just remnants of the past. They were a gateway, a crossroads where history and destiny converged. As I emerged from the chamber, I felt the forest shift around me. The path back to the village seemed unfamiliar, the trees denser than before. Every sound felt magnified, the rustle of leaves, the distant chirp of birds, even the whisper of the wind. I walked carefully, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I finally reached the edge of the forest, I saw a figure waiting for me. It was one of the elders, their face etched with worry. "You shouldn't have gone there," the elder said, their voice trembling. "The ruins are not a place for the unprepared." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the exhaustion from my journey silenced me. Instead, I followed them back to the village, my thoughts racing. What did they know about the ruins? About the lake? Their silence only deepened the mystery. That night, sleep eluded me, The man's warning and the elder's words churned in my mind, blending into a tangle of questions I couldn't unravel. As I stared at the ceiling, the faint hum of the melody returned, pulling at the edges of my consciousness. It wasn't coming from outside this time, but from within me, as if the lake had planted a seed in my soul. The following morning, I sought out the elder who had spoken to me. They were reluctant to talk, but eventually relented, their voice hushed. The lake reveals what we need to see, but it doesn't choose lightly, they said. You've been marked by it now. Whatever path you're on, it's one only you can walk. Their words offered little comfort, but they confirmed what I had begun to suspect. My connection to the lake was no accident. Days turned into weeks, but the visions and whispers never faded. I began to notice patterns in the ruins' carvings, pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite assemble. Each discovery brought new questions, but also a sense of purpose. The lake wasn't just showing me the past, it was guiding me toward something. But what? The answer felt just out of reach, like a word on the tip of my tongue. One evening, as I sat by the lake's edge, I saw movement in the water. It wasn't a vision this time, but something real, a ripple that broke the surface, followed by a faint glow. I leaned closer, my heart racing. The glow intensified, forming the shape of a hand reaching out toward me. Without thinking, I reached back. The moment our fingers touched, the world dissolved into light. I found myself standing in a place I couldn't name, surrounded by stars that felt close enough to touch. The lake's melody filled the air, clearer than ever before. Welcome, a voice said, and I turned to see the woman from my visions. She was more vivid now, her presence commanding yet comforting. You've crossed the threshold, she said. This is where your journey truly begins. She extended her hand, and as I took it, the stars around us shifted, forming images of the ruins, the forest, and the altar. The lake is more than a mirror, she said. It's a bridge between worlds, a conduit for the truth. But truth is a double-edged blade. Are you prepared to wield it? Her question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Before I could answer, the scene shifted again, and I was back by the lake's edge. The glow was gone, replaced by the soft light of the moon. But something had changed. The connection I felt to the lake was stronger now, no longer just a pull, but a bond. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. The lake had chosen me, and I would honor its call. As I stood, the wind carried the faint melody once more. It no longer felt like a whisper, but a promise, a reminder that the path forward was mine to shape. Whatever lay ahead, be it danger, revelation, or both, I knew one thing for certain. The lake's echoes would guide me, and I would listen.